The first wave of films in Marvel's cinematic universe brought with it a number of largely unsuccessful attempts at tie-in games for consoles. Then, the early 2010s saw the comic giant drifting away from this strategy as a result of this, investing more in mobile titles. One of their tentpole movies, The Avengers, passed by in 2012 without a major console adaptation or tie-in, aside from Ubisoft's Avengers Battle for Earth, a smaller release coming only to Wii U and Xbox 360. Originally, however, this was not meant to be the case. In 2010, publisher THQ had acquired the rights to produce a large-scale video game based around the Avengers property. It was set to launch within the same year as the movie of the same name on multiple platforms. Although that's not to say that this game would have been a direct adaptation of the movie, far from it. Instead, it was a largely original story featuring different villains and a bigger cast of Avengers. Pre-production on the project began around August 2010 at THQ Studio Australia in Brisbane. When it was first entering development, the plan was to make a third-person action game with an all-star lineup of heroes. A very basic prototype was made featuring Captain America to test out how it might handle. This was the point at which the game would change course dramatically. The developers came to the conclusion that there was already a long history of third-person action-adventure games based around Marvel IP, and that they didn't want to just add to it. They weren't looking to simply retread these footsteps, but instead to do something completely different. The team went back to the drawing board and reimagined their Avengers title as a first-person action game. Showing players the world through the eyes of each hero, this made it the first ever superhero game to fully embrace this perspective. From this juncture, it began to shift towards a title built entirely around cooperative play, to encapsulate the dynamics of teamwork that the Avengers comics were all about. Co-op with friends became a big focus. Each player would assume the role of a different hero with their own unique powers, strengths and weaknesses. Just like the source material, how these characters with their many differences would gel together became the core of what THQ Studio Oz was trying to embody. The story featured in the Avengers game was fairly enormous in its scope. It featured the group embarking on an international mission to protect the world from a surprise alien invasion at the hands of the Skrulls, a race of shapeshifters from the comics. The basic outline of the plot bears many similarities to the Secret Invasion comic storyline, and that is no coincidence. THQ had hired the same writer from that production, Brian Michael Bendis, to pen the narrative for their game. As such, the two were very much alike, with a few new ideas sprinkled here and there. An artist who worked on the project informed me that the story was able to reach a fairly finished state. It would have begun with a huge mothership seizing New York City, as led by Varanki, the Skrull Queen. Skrull priests, a league of powerful religious warriors, controlled the ship, attempting to use it to conquer various major cities and locales. Super Skrulls as well made up a large part of the invading army, larger, stronger soldiers who would mimic the abilities of their enemies. They came in many different forms, including Wolverine and Fantastic Four versions. The end game of the Skrull forces, according to a former developer, was to capture every Earth superhero, enslaving them and feeding off their power to rule with an iron fist. Aside from this, it could almost be described as a loose adaptation of Secret Invasion. During the opening section of the game, Varanki would have disguised herself as Spider-Woman, just as she did in Secret Invasion, to infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D. Another example of how it borrowed from that story was the Skrulls' use of the Negative Zone. In order to remove the Fantastic Four from Earth's defense, the invaders decimate their base of operations, the Baxter Building, by engulfing it in a portal to the Negative Zone. This entraps the four of them, preventing them from assisting the Avengers. In its earlier days, the art direction for the Avengers explored many possibilities. Some of it leaned towards a more vibrant, classic, old-school style, before they eventually settled on visuals more akin to that of Ultimate Marvel. Jeremy Love was one of the main artists on the project and spoke to me about the artwork he produced for it. According to him, the look they went with was inspired by the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Jeremy denied the rumor of there being some significant connection between the video game and the Marvel Studios films, but he did confirm to me that they were given access to early concept art from the Avengers movie. The art team then based much of the designs in their game around it. Although he was adamant that the relationship between the film and the video game was very minor, Love did reveal to me that there was an action figure released based around art made by THQ, originally meant for their video game. This was a Skrull soldier released in a line of toys in association with the Avengers film in 2012. 4 main characters were featured in THQ's game. These were Captain America, Iron Man, Hulk, and Thor. Initially, they would have been the only heroes playable, though more would become available as players made progress. Hawkeye and Black Widow were set to be unlockable, as were Ms. Marvel and War Machine. The campaign saw the group traversing a variety of established locations from the comics, including SHIELD facilities like the Triskelion and the Helicarrier, as well as Manhattan and even the Savage Land. It all led up to a face-off with the Skrull Queen and a gigantic Super Skrull which they had been experimenting on underground in a secret lab. Despite the Skrulls being overwhelmingly the main force opposing the Avengers, there was also side characters, including a newly rogue Ultron and Vision. This part of the story would have involved Hank Pym's Ant-Man attempting to stop the twisted plans of his rebellious creation. Ultimately, however, little to none of this proposed material involving Ultron is known to have actually made it into any build of the game itself. For THQ, this battle between the Avengers and the Skrulls was really the centerpiece. As previously mentioned, cooperative gameplay was also central to what the developers were trying to accomplish. Players would have been able to tackle missions with up to 4 players either locally via split screen, online, or any combination of the two. Thus, many of the mechanics revolved around teamwork between each hero, including a Gears of War-esque revival system. With their many varying abilities like Hulk's brute strength or Iron Man's flight, each Avenger brought something different to the table from a gameplay perspective. At the same time, they all had types of moves in common. Assists allowed players to stun enemies, leaving them open to other Avengers to perform one of a deadly series of finishing attacks. For example, Thor could summon a barrage of lightning to immobilize them before Captain America could step in and deliver the final blow with his shield. By leaving one enemy open for an ally to attack, players could rack up elaborate combos between one another, gaining score bonuses and multipliers. In addition were hero boosts. These were defensive moves that would allow you to buff up fellow Avengers for a limited period of time. Captain America, for instance, could instill a morale boost by calling out targets, or Iron Man could briefly summon energy shields around his companions. A detailed experience point system underpinned the game as a means of developing and unlocking new abilities. Players would constantly amass XP based upon their actions, whether it was helping a teammate in battle, racking up kills, or destroying enemy weapon caches. Matthew Ota, who was a senior designer on the project, explained that the Oz team had spent a considerable amount of resources to ensure stages had sufficient variety. King of the Hill style objectives made up one part of this, in which players would have to work together and arrange themselves to control parts of the mission area. They would also be required to complete tasks like disabling Skrull energy weapons before they reach critical mass. As the mission objectives in each level grew more varied and elaborate, the team made the decision to revamp the artificial intelligence system for computer-controlled characters. The friendly AI, they believed, would need to be more than competent, especially for anyone experiencing the game on their own. They almost completely redesigned it at one point, adjusting their accuracy and behaviour to make them feel more human. Development had been progressing smoothly into the first months of 2011, but despite a fairly large team of 80 staffers, they were still racing to meet deadlines. To stay on schedule, a chunk of the game was outsourced to another Australian subsidiary of THQ, Bluetongue Entertainment, the company behind the De Blob games. They were responsible for much of the PC build, as well as environment work, predominantly on the Helicarrier stage. The Xbox 360 and PS3 were the two main platforms they were focusing on, with a PC version on the slate too. Later into the year, plans were drawn for a Wii U port as well, which would have been released around the launch of the system. There was talk of it using the unique functions of the gamepad like off-TV play, although the project never got far enough for any of this to materialise. Other console exclusive features were being looked into earlier on, such as a Kinect mode for the Xbox 360 called Avengers Training Academy. It would have seen players controlling a rookie superhero alongside key Avengers, exercising and entering disaster scenario simulations. This was, however, abandoned in pre-production. Work on the game continued into mid-2011, when circumstances impacting THQ's financials would place the project in serious jeopardy. A succession of catastrophic missteps were made in the publisher's final years. The U-Draw peripheral, for example, has since been attributed as one of the company's many large mistakes. While the first iteration of the tablet enjoyed a decent degree of success on the Nintendo Wii, when a second, more expensive version was rolled out for the Xbox 360 and PS3, it flopped in spectacular fashion. A staggering 1.4 million units were left unsold, collecting dust in warehouses, meaning sales estimates fell $100 million short of expectations. Before long, THQ was being crippled by failures like this, essentially bleeding money. To ensure their short-term survival, they would need to start cutting back on spending drastically. The first project in their crosshairs, unfortunately for those involved, was the Avengers. Contrary to rumour, their decision was not a reflection of its quality. In reality, it was strictly down to economics. In July 2011, the value of the Australian dollar began to soar to record highs. For all intents and purposes, this meant that it was costing THQ more to pay its workers in Australia than anywhere else. With approximately 200 staff on their payroll between THQ Studio Oz and Bluetongue, they plan to shut both of them down in a desperate attempt to continue the business. In the last weeks of the now doomed Avengers game, its core developers tried to form a contingency to keep it going. THQ would not pay for the project themselves, so they tried to secure alternative funding by going to Marvel itself. Despite apparently being impressed with what the team had been able to achieve, they were not willing to back such an expensive venture. For the Avengers, this was the final nail in its coffin. A decent amount of the game had already been made at this stage, with many of its environments laid out and most of its characters built in. When it was cancelled, Black Widow and Hawkeye were in the middle of being prototyped. In the years that followed its cancellation, Brian Michael Bendis has since spoken out about his involvement. In one instance, he expressed regret over its termination, describing what was finished as great. Shortly after THQ Studio Oz closed its doors, I obtained word that Bendis had maintained a playable build of the game as a personal keepsake. In January 2015, I revealed some new information about the title, prompting him to discuss it yet again. On his Tumblr, he was asked if there was a chance of it ever being resurrected, to which he replied, "I wouldn't think so. It's a generation past tech-wise. It was cool. It is cool, and I will never understand how they let that one sink and not sell it off when the whole company folded." If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more, and if you'd like to discover more console games, you can check them out over on my channel by hitting one of the annotations. There's a video exploring Nintendo's infamous disaster Project Hammer, and a Lost Kid Icarus game featuring an adult version of Pit. You can check out Unseen64 at unseen64.net. Unseen64 is a huge digital archive for cancelled, unreleased and beta games. There's over 1,000 games to discover on there currently, so if the unseen side of gaming is of interest to you, I would highly recommend it. Thanks for watching and have fun.